Dzień dobry. Tak. Geological research in Verkiai, the origins of Vilnius between legends and facts. Verkiai, an important part of modern-day Vilnius, was historically a separate territory located around 7 kilometers from the emerging medieval city. Verkiai is linked to Vilnius through the legend of the pagan priest Lizdeika. It was Lizdeika who interpreted a dream about howling wolf for the Grand Duke of Lithuania Gediminas in the beginning of the 14th century. Since at least the 16th century, the history of Verkiai has been closely related to the bishop's residence. This presentation focuses on the late medieval period spanning the reign of Mindaugas through the reign of Gediminas. The exceptional burials discovered in 2024 were dated to this period, which gave impulse to the formulation of new hypotheses about the area. The graves were inhumations, while cremation was the predominant practice among pagan Lithuanians, and the rich grave goods was atypical for this region, instead reflecting Latgalian material code. Besides, already in 2008, several graves were discovered in Verkiai, with grave goods similar to the material from cemeteries on Bokšto Street in Vilnius and Kriveikiškis in Kernavė, both associated primarily with newcomers Christians, most likely Orthodox. In Lithuania, 13th and 14th centuries are characterized by intense state information processes. During this period, Vilna, the capital of Grand Duchy of Lithuania, was far from isolated. On the contrary, it maintained contacts with neighbors and distant lands. Connection with Orthodox and Catholics are well studied. Curonians, Prussians, Yetvingians, and Semigalians are frequently mentioned as by scholars in the context of ethnic refugees. But a little attention has been devoted to the Latgalians despite close neighborhoods. Archaeological material revealed the presence of human activity in Verkiai from at least the second half of the 13th century. But this raises several questions regarding the identity of the individuals buried, possible connection with the legend of Lizdeika, migration, interactions with growing city of Vilnius, and so on. Verkiai was the first mention in written sources in 1387. In the privilege granted to the Bishop of Vilnius by Grand Duke Jogaila. Other records date back only to the 16th century. In the 19th century, a pattern begins to emerge in the association of Verkiai with Lizdeika, a connection most likely established by the Romantics of that era. It's likely that the supporters of this hypothesis combined two mentions of Verkiai given by Matej Strijkovski, the legend of Lizdeika, and the description of battles for Vilnius during the reign of Vytautas in the end of the 14th century. Although Strijkovski himself did not associate Lizdeika with Verkiai, though Verkiai has most often been presented from two perspectives. The first emphasized its legendary connection to Lizdeika, alluding the role of the pagan cult site, and the second concerns the history of the bishop's residence. It's interesting that whether pagan or Christian, Verkiai is referenced within a religious context. Extensive archaeological research has been carried out at Verkiai, but these excavations have varied in type, scale, and quality. Besides, they have often been romanticized, connecting the findings without any evidence to Lizdeika, his temple, priestesses, and the pagan past of the era. The first excavation took place in the middle 19th century, most likely in 1845, as suggested by a note published in the newspaper Kurier Wileński. The discovery of 12 graves dating to the 13th, 14th centuries during archaeological excavations in 2007 and 2008 marked the beginning of the new phase of interest in Verkiai. Hypotheses about the identity of the individuals buried here began to take shape. It was noted that Verkiai burials were arranged according to Christian traditions, non-cremated, and with a head pointing west, and that the cemetery predates the official Christianization of Lithuania in 1387. After the discovery of the first graves with the grave good, the question of their confessional or ethnic affiliation was raised. However, the data remained insufficient at that time. The archaeological excavation conducted in 2024, which uncovered information burials with some exceptional grave goods, provide new insights about Verkiai. You can see some information about trench number 1, 2, and 3 in the slides. However, it was trench 4 which yielded the most significant discoveries. It was located in closest proximity to the graves found in the 2008. Near the end of the excavation, a partial school and ceramic vessel were uncovered in the southern wall of this trench. This finding protect the extension of trench, resulting in the discovery of grave 13, a female aged 40. An exceptional rich assemblage of grave goods was found in the grave. A wreath with copper alloy spirals, a necklace consisting of spirals, cowrie shields, metal pendants, and glass beads, flat, metal-plated brass bracelets, 7 rings to symbolic keys, and metal jingles. The deceased had likely been wrapped in a mantle that was fastened with a brooch. To the left of the tibia, a hand-built ceramic pot with a wheeled through finish was found. The partial exposure of a cranium in the eastern wall of the same trench protected another extension, which led to the discovery of grave 14. The deceased was female, aged 16-25, with her head oriented to the west. Grave goods were abundant. A wreath, a spiral necklace, pendants, spirals, beads, 3 bracelets, 5 rings, a brooch with zoomorphic terminals, a chain fragment, a horse-shaped pendant, a knife, a flat brooch, a metal rattle. On the left side of the grave, a pot was also found. Lastly, grave 15 was identified. At the bottom of the pit, a few bones of a child were found, also a jingle and a china. Right. The analysis of all grave goods indicated that do not align with the material culture typically observed in other Lithuanian burial grounds. Rather, it closely corresponds to the burial assemblages characteristic of Latgalian women indeed. It may be even reflect national Latgalian dress. For example, the dress held a particularly important place among the grave goods of Latgalian women. One of the defining elements of Latgalian female dress is a woolen shawl, so-called Wilna. Both female in Verkiai were buried wearing such shawls. Beads were widely used to adorn wreaths, so-called vainags, as was the case in graves at Verkiai. Of course, necklaces made from the glass and amber beads, various pendants, cowrie shields, jingles, and similar elements were characteristic personal ornaments among the women of numerous Baltic tribes. So it's only through the consideration of the full assemblage of grave goods from the graves at Verkiai that it became possible to seek the indicators of Latgalian presence. For example, although determining a woman's ethnic affiliation based solely on her necklaces is challenging, certain features are indicative of the Latgalian identity. These include a so-called brace pendant, like one in the grave 13, as well as crows. Such pendant shapes reached the Latgalians via the Daugava trade routes, primarily from the neighboring Orthodox territories. Although Latgalians still wore neck rings decorated with the trapezoidal pendants in the 13th century, they were increasingly replaced by beads and cowrie shields. Round and rhomboid pendants became widespread, particularly in the 13th century, along with the open work, cross-shaped, and zoomorphic pendants. The abundant use of chainless and spiral ornaments in both necklaces and wreaths is specifically associated with the Latgalians. The abundance of bracelets is also a characteristic feature of the dress of Latgalian women. In female burial, they are typically found in equal numbers of both arms. Instances of bracelets being found on a single arm are rare. This pattern is clear in grave 13 at Verkiai. Each arm bore a single bracelet. The defining characteristic of burials in this period is the custom of inhumation itself. Although cremation was still prevalent among the pagans in eastern Lithuania at this time, urban cemeteries such as those of Kriveikiškis and Bokšto Street contained inhumation. The Bokšto Street cemetery is attributed to the Vilnius Orthodox community. The affiliation of the Kriveikiškis cemetery remains subject to debate, although it's clear that a certain degree of Christian influences exist within the community. Therefore, a presence of inhumation in the predominantly pagan region is not an anomaly. Rather, the question arises as to which specific community, ethnicity, or confession these burials in Verkiai should be associated with. The Latgalians adopted inhumation practices relatively early, burying their dead in the both flat and barrow cemeteries. Inhumations was clearly the dominant practice in Latgalian lands during the period in question. The transition from cremation to inhumation may be related to some influences of the neighboring Christian communities, both Orthodox and Livonian Catholic. As you can see in the slide, the spatial position of the body could be determined in 12 of the 15th graves, investigated in Verkiai in 2007, 2008, and 2024. The westward orientation and the head of the head is considered one of the canonical features of the Christian burial tradition. However, while Latgalian women were buried in the same manner, in contrast, men were usually buried in the opposite direction, heads to the east. Indeed, the female burials at Verkiai reflected the same custom, but only one male burial was oriented to the southeast in this area. In the case of grave 13 and 14, the spatial orientation of the burials complements with the grave Busa and further support the affiliation with Latgalian tradition. The attribution of a single male burial of the Latgalian community remains purely speculative at this present. The Latgalians frequently placed their dead on a bed of beech bark or wooden plats in a hollowed out of coffins. Grave 13 and 14 at Verkiai contain traces of decayed pine coffins or coffin-like wooden structure. Fragments of beech bark were also recovered. As for chronology of the graves at Verkiai, you can see the results of C14 in the slide. The highest reliability range falls within the second half of the 13th century. The graves most likely date to the second half of the 13th century and may be associated with the reign of Grand Duke Vytenis, as well as his predecessors Butigeidis, Butvydas, or even Traidenis, through North King Mindaugas. The community that buried its dead in Verkiai presents many questions. First, concerning the possible ethnic or confessional affiliation. As we already mentioned, the entire assemblage in grave 13 and 14 is so distinctively Latgalian, and argument could be made for the women in these graves having been buried in full traditional Latgalian costume. But graves 11 and 12, excavated in 2008, differ more closely resembling those found in the urban cemeteries at Kriveikiškis in Kernavė and Bokšto Street in Vilna. It's likely that the community from Verkiai at the very least included some Latgalians who had settled in the area for reasons unknown. However, their confessional affiliations remain unclear, Catholic or Orthodox or maybe still pagans. The situation at Verkiai is complex. The graves 13 and 14 suggest a Latgalian element. Graves 11 and 12 are reminiscent of the material from the Bokšto Street and Kriveikiškis cemeteries, albeit with poorer quality jewelry made of copper rather than silver and a slightly earlier chronological limit. Therefore, it would be inaccurate to describe Verkiai as a Latgalian cemetery based only on two female burials. Rather, we can identify certain Latgalian influences within it. A new premise should be considered that the Verkiai community may have exhibited heterogeneity in both ethnic composition and religious affiliation. The area has been only particularly excavated and the available data is insufficient for drawing definitive conclusions, but this interpretation is nevertheless grounded in the existing findings. Only 15 graves have been excavated so far, and yet suitable differences in grave goods and orientation have already been observed. The majority of the burials at Verkiai are female, with several of these rich in grave goods, and no cremation burials were identified. Could it be that pagan men, possibly married to Latgalian women, were buried elsewhere, perhaps cremated? The small number of excavated graves suggests either that the community itself was quite small, or that only a portion of the cemetery has been uncovered so far. If the community at Verkiai indeed consisting of people from different groups, what was unifying factor? Two key aspects stand out. First, the relatively rich grave goods found in the excavated female burials. Second, and perhaps more unexpected, the association with the legend of Lizdeiki. It's often said that there is a grain of truth in every legend. So, could the legend of Lizdeiki imply that this location was indeed once a spiritual or cult center. If so, the spiritual character of the location persisted even after the adoption of Christianity in Lithuania. After all, in 1387, Verkiai was granted as part of a privilege to the Bishop of Wilna. Therefore, an argument could be made for a form of continuity in the site's religious function. Also, could it be that the Verkiai area held significance for the Grand Dukes? Maybe this place has served as an important estate or as a place of residence for the individuals closely associated with the Grand Dukes, including members of the elite. This is why the grave goods were so rich. Another possibility is connection to the Grand Duke's court or household, the closest circle of Duke associates and companions. Further support for this interpretation is found in the fact that the entire Verkiai area has formerly belonged to the Grand Duke, as demonstrated of his act of granting it to the Bishop of Vilnius in 1387. It appears that the area did not evolve into an urban center, and at least for the time being, there is no evidence to suggest the presence of a significant settlement in the area. Considerable population movement took place around Vilnius during the second half of the 13th century, so it's possible that Duke Circle may have chosen to settle at Verkiai in close proximity to Vilnius. Perhaps later, with the growth of the cities, they relocated to the territory of Vilnius itself. The findings from Verkiai remind us of Lithuania's often forgotten connections with the Bulgarians in the 13th and 14th centuries, provide material evidence in support of these contacts, and demonstrate both the city of Vilnius did not develop on virgin ground, and that its growth also influenced the settlement of the surrounding area. While we cannot claim a direct link between Vilnius and Verkiai, the findings at Verkiai fit very well in chronological terms with the processes of the city establishment. The intensity and nature of this connection remain purely hypothetical, however. Archaeological research at Verkiai is expected to continue, and it hoped that the future findings will allow for the reliable confirmation or rejection of at least some of the hypotheses raised in this presentation. And thank you for your attention.